right, hey everybody, welcome back. Good to see you guys this morning. We're going to get started in a moment for our 10 a.m. Intro to Philosophy class here at Chapman. I hope you guys are doing well, comfortable, and ready to go. We have another important meeting as we go over the topic of the philosophy of mind a little bit. We got started briefly at the end of last class, so today we're going to try and really go over the argument for dualism from our friend Rene Descartes. Kitty's just hanging out with me as usual. So that's the plan. Try to cover Descartes and see how much time is left over afterward. So welcome back, everybody. Good to see you guys. Just getting myself organized. Hey, Kaylee. There we go. Hey, Kitty. This kitty's crazy, huh? Just never gets enough attention. What's up, kitty? Cool, just a few minutes till 10, but welcome one and all. Good morning to you guys. Feel free to say hi or comment, chat, anything under the sun is all good. Hey, Brian. I mean, not only, hey there, guys. Hey, Bridger. Not only does this cat wake me up in the morning, doesn't let me sleep in, but then she just wants to invade all these lectures too. She's a good girl, though. Hey, Jessica. Hi. Nice to see you. Hey there. Yes. Yes, William, it's Kitty. Cool. She does want to learn. She's highly intelligent for a cat, I gotta say. She really surprises me all the time, even after 16 years. She really just doesn't want me to have access to these notes, you know. In her mind, I shouldn't be paying attention to anything except for her, but that's all right. What's up, kitty? What's the plan here? All right. All right, Katie. Well, if you could just stay there and be a good girl, maybe we can not throw off the board or the table. Okay. Well, hey guys, welcome back. Good to see everybody here, and it's April 22nd. This is Wednesday. This is for our 10 to 10:50 class. So we're going to just jump right in. If you guys remember, towards the end of last lecture, we started talking about a new topic for our semester, and that's the philosophy of mind. So the philosophy of mind, it's all about consciousness, thought, perception, experience. What is the mind? I mean, is it something that's just the brain, or is there more to consciousness and so on than the physical brain? When we ask questions about what's the ultimate nature of consciousness, is it something merely physical? Could computers think, or could they never think? Then we are doing the philosophy of mind. And there are these two big positions in the philosophy of mind. There's monism and dualism. So monism, first of all, is the point or position that everything in the universe is just made out of one kind of substance. Dualism is the alternative idea that there's two substances that make everything up. Within monism and dualism, these discussions proceed with regard to two possible substances. Okay, so one of them is physical matter. Physical matter is just anything that is extended in space, anything that just occupies space. And the ultimate constituent of physical matter is generally referred to as the atom. Okay, now the other type of substance that's being mentioned here is mind. Mind is thought of as something that does not have extension in space, so has no physical dimensions, no size, shape, weight, volume, mass, or anything else. It's just literally not in space. It's not extended, but it still is thinking. So it's kind of like the idea of a soul, a spirit, pure consciousness, unattached to any physical substance. Now, if you're a monist and you think everything in the universe is just made out of one kind of substance, then there are two options for you. One monism is physicalist monism, and that's the view that says everything is made out of physical matter, including us and our thoughts. So if you're a physicalist type of monist, then there's actually no mind. There's just the brain. There's the brain. It's neurochemistry, but absent the brain, there's no possibility of consciousness, because consciousness is rooted in the physical structure of the brain, and that's it. It's just a physical process. The other type of monism, which we were talking about as we closed the class period, is idealism. And idealism just says that everything is made out of thoughts. So all of reality is built out of or is composed out of ideas. So I'll just put that term here instead of writing it on the board one time, because it's not something that I think needs a whole detailed board notation. So idealism Okay, so you see I typed into the chat the comment, the note. That's just the definition of idealism. It's the other type of monism, which says that everything in the universe is made out of ideas. So this table, this room, the whiteboard, even just my own body, all those things are simply thoughts that are being had in the mind, and therefore there's no solidity, no material, no substance to them. They're all just ideas. Now that's kind of marginal nowadays. It's relegated to the sidelines. Most people don't really adhere to idealism anymore, but for the sake of having a complete taxonomy of concepts, I just wanted to mention it. In our class, we're mostly going to be, as we discuss philosophy of mind, comparing and debating between physicalist monism and dualism. Now, dualism is the one that says not just one or the other, but both. There's both matter, but also mind. So according to dualism, there's two substances that make everything in reality, matter and mind. So like when it comes to me and you, we're a composite of both. Our body is the material thing that's got flesh and blood and bones and everything else. It's got material substance to it, but the thought of the dualist is that there's also your consciousness, which is not extended in space and which is purely immaterial and disembodied and just thinking. So what's correct then? Monism or dualism? Is there just the brain and physical matter, or is there physical matter, but also this mysterious, non-extended thinking substance, which is called the mind? Today, we're going to try and examine an argument for dualism. There's arguments on both sides. So by the time we're done with this topic, we will study viewpoints from physicalist monists and dualists. But to get us going and get started on this whole journey, we're going to go over an argument for dualism, a very famous, well-known argument for dualism, from our philosopher friend, Rene Descartes. So Descartes is an author that we already studied earlier in the semester a little while ago. He's the guy who wrote the Meditations. And his Meditations is a book which has 6 chapters. We studied the first 2. Today, the lesson is about that last chapter, namely the 6th meditation. Okay, so Descartes' argument for dualism is the main theme of today's meeting. And I'm not sure if this note appeared in the previous meeting, but I'm just going to put it in the chat also so that it's totally clear. The definition of dualism. Everything in the universe is made out of 2 kinds of substance. And then just so that we're clear about the 2 kinds are, I'll put them in parentheses. Everything in the universe is made out of 2 kinds of substances: matter and mind. Okay. So Descartes' argument for dualism. This is an author who defends the position of dualism. He thinks there's not just one kind of substance that makes everything, but two. And this is the man's name again, René Descartes. He lived from 1596 to 1650. The book that we're looking at is from 1641. It's called The Meditations. And we are reviewing the 6th chapter of it, which is called Meditation 6. Okay, so Meditation 6 kind of holds the argument for dualism within it. And that's what we're now trying to really grasp. So when we read the first 2 chapters of the Meditations a couple weeks ago, we were studying epistemology, the theory of knowledge. And if you remember, Descartes' goal by writing this book was to try and discover what is totally certain. He thought we need to find out what is certain, and if we can find out what is like absolutely certain that could not ever be doubted, then that could be the sort of thing to use as the foundations to build the structure of knowledge upon. He thought that we need to have some absolutely secure foundations there. Otherwise, maybe in the future, when we think we've developed a lot of scientific understanding, we're going to have to reject it all because we will realize that our initial assumptions were incorrect. So let's get those first initial assumptions locked in and dead certain. But how to do that, he says, use the method of doubt. Okay, so he establishes the method of doubt. He says, use this to find out what is certain. The method of doubt says to doubt and assume to be false anything which could even possibly be false. And using that method, there's all kinds of things that you can doubt, like even the existence of everything you perceive by your senses, even math and logic. But that's kind of, and then in the second meditation, he says, but there's this one thing you can't doubt, and that's that you exist because you are thinking. That's where we closed the first 2 meditations. We also talked about his example of the wax a little bit, but that's where the first 2 meditations ends. Now we're picking up at the end of the book, and I just kind of have to help you understand his argument for dualism because there's some bits and pieces of it that are scattered in between meditation 3, 4, and 5. And he kind of makes, indirect reference to the steps of that argument in this chapter 6. But to make sure it's fully clear and understood by everybody, I'm going to just really diagram the argument for dualism that you can derive from Meditation 6 and the intervening chapters between 2 and 6. So I'm teaching you guys the argument for dualism that you'll find in Descartes' Meditations. But it's a little bit laid out in a sketchy way if you just read through it on the basis of the pages that you've been assigned. So I'm going to try and give you some better context and really bring it down to earth for you. So this is going to be a breakdown and an explanation of Descartes' argument for dualism as found in the 6th meditation. Okay, so here's just author and information, chapter and date. Now I'm going to erase this and we're going to really dive into his argument. So maybe I should have left the header at the top, but you'll see in your own notes. This is Descartes' argument for dualism here. Okay, now arguments in philosophy and in logic are set forth in a particular way. It's what we call standard form. The standard form of an argument is where you've got a conclusion at the end, and above that conclusion you have a series of what are called premises that are listed, which are supposed to provide reasons or evidence towards the conclusion. Okay, so that's standard form of an argument. Premises listed at the top with the conclusion below, and the conclusion is the result of all those premises put together. You guys maybe remember your studies in elementary mathematics and stuff. And sometimes you were asked to do like basic math problems like this. 2 + 2 = 4. Now all I want to do is just call your attention to the way the structure of this looks visually. You have the sum total at the bottom. There's a line that separates it from the operation of addition and the factors that are added together above, the numbers. In logic, we're not dealing with numbers, but we have propositions. And you see a similar structure visually, where the conclusion is listed below, and all the information that's supposed to be provided that leads to that conclusion is stated above. So that's how we're now going to display this argument. It's going to be a sequence of premises that ultimately lead to the conclusion of dualism. But it's a complex argument. There are a lot of premises, so we're just going to have to take it step by step, okay? So let's start at the beginning of Descartes' big argument for dualism with premise 1. I'm going to number them like this, and there's so many premises of the argument and so many steps in it that I'll have to erase the board and start adding additional premises at various points. but we'll begin here with number 1, obviously. So the first premise of the argument says that using the method of doubt, I'm able to doubt everything perceived by my senses and even math and logic. Okay, so that's the first premise, and what it just says is, using the method of doubt, I'm able to doubt everything perceived by the senses, even able to doubt math and logic. Remember why he said we're able to doubt those two particular types of thing. We're able to doubt everything perceived by the senses. Why was that? Because although it seems like the things that you're seeing, hearing, taste, touching, and feeling are real, it could just be that it's all a dream. Okay, so using the method of doubt, we're not going to just ignore that possibility and say, come on, though, it's not a dream. We're going to say, well, who knows? It could be. So maybe, therefore, it is. And so let's assume that it's all false. What about that second piece, the math and logic stuff? Concerning that, he said maybe there could be an external source of deception, like an evil demon or something along those lines, that's interfering with your ability to correctly process even very basic mathematical and logical information. So even that could be maybe doubtful. But the second premise takes us towards the second step of this argument, which says that even though you can use the method of doubt to doubt all those things, there's this one thing that cannot be doubted, even by the method of doubt. Who remembers that? So despite this, there's one thing that is totally certain, and that is what statement or fact? The method of doubt, he says, cannot eliminate the certainty that what? Something is still certain, that the method of doubt couldn't cause you to doubt. What was that again? Just so I see if you remember it. This thing can't be doubted. Even Descartes says so. What is it? Well, you say your thoughts, yes, but because you are thinking, I'm talking about the knowledge that you exist. Okay, so that's something that you cannot doubt exists. You, the doubter, having the doubts, must be a thing which exists. So despite this, I know that I exist because I'm thinking. What is it that you know of yourself as existing? You don't necessarily know whether you have a body because that's still subject to the doubts which could happen within dreams. But at a minimum, we can take to the bank that you know for sure that you exist as a what? Like, what does he say? You say you know you exist because you're thinking. Good. But you know that you exist as what? Just want to get that little piece of info clear. You're correct when you say that you know you exist because you're thinking. Yes. But the existence of this self is a thinking thing. Good. It's not known to be an embodied physical thing. That's something that's still subject to doubts for now. Okay, so premise 2. Despite this, I know for certain that I exist as a thinking mind because I'm thinking. Despite this, I know for certain that I exist, at least as a mind. Okay, little parenthetical point, at least as a mind. And why? Because I'm thinking. Okay, so this is the first two kind of opening moves in the argument. Number 1, we had the method of doubt, which showed us that you could doubt everything you perceive by your senses, even math, even logic. But the step 2 shows that although those things can be doubted, the existence of you, the thinker, cannot be doubted because you're thinking. So you know you exist, if not as a body, at least as a non-physical mind, because of the very fact that you're even having these thoughts. Okay, Now, the next step of the argument talks about, well, since you're a thinking thing, and that's clear, what are these things that you're thinking about? He says, well, in the mind of this thinking thing that you are, there are ideas. And included in the ideas in your mind, there's one, he says, that holds very special importance because it's above and beyond and greater than all the other ideas you have. He says, included in your mind, which is thinking, are ideas, including the idea of, what do you believe he's going to put on the table there? I'll give you a hint. It's an idea of a being that's supposed to be very powerful and special. He says, in the mind of each person, or at least in your mind, there's the idea of this being. And this idea of this being is over and beyond greater than all other ideas you have because it's the idea of something infinite. What is the idea you think he's talking about and mentioning here of an infinite being? What could it be? It reminds us a little bit of some of our earlier studies in the class. So see if you can make a quick judgment on that. Yeah, it's God. It's the idea of God. So I'll put that on the table here on the next premise. So I'm erasing premise 1 and 2, but the argument continues. So in your own notes, it should be listed in a list-wise fashion. But for the sake of limitations of space, I'll have to continue to clear the board and add new details to the argument. But I'm numbering the premises, and those numberings will help you to keep it organized on your page. So you guys are right. He's referring to God here. Third premise then. Okay, so premise 3, as we just go through the same argument. So included in my ideas is the idea of God. Included in my mind is the idea of God. And to add to that, he says this idea is unique among all ideas of the mind because unlike all the others, this is the idea of an infinite being. So the idea of God is special, it's unique, because it is the idea of an infinite being. Okay, so let's just continue to kind of remind ourselves where we are at in the argument. We began with an observation that using the method of doubt, you can doubt all kinds of things, including the existence of all things perceived by the senses, even the truth of mathematical and logical statements. But one thing that cannot be doubted is that you exist at minimum as a mind because of the fact that you're simply thinking at all. Okay, well, knowing that you exist as a mind, we can say safely that you do have ideas. And included in these ideas is one, the idea of God. The idea of God is unique, it's special, because unlike all the other ideas, it's the idea of an infinite being. Okay, so the next step in the argument is very important to the procedure of getting to his conclusion. He next talks about this question: where could the idea of God that you have in your mind, what could have possibly given you that idea? What could have caused you to have the idea of an infinite being? So I think the best thing for me to do now is to sort of use the board to show you a little diagram that is helpful to explaining this. So I'm going to erase that premise 3 and 4 now that it's in your notes, and I'm going to show you how to get from premise 4 to 5. Okay. So way back in the day when I was a college student at UCLA, I was learning this material on Descartes in the philosophy class I was taking, and this was a useful example given to me by one of my teachers there, so I'm passing it on to you. Hopefully it's helpful to you a little bit too. So let's say here is a container. Okay? And let's just label this container B. And all I'm telling you is that in container B there's a gallon of water. That's the water line. It's got a gallon in it. Kitty, sorry for that, but I need to. Okay. So you see that? Here's container B, holds a gallon of water. Now look at this. All I'm telling you is that B got this. Let's see if you could tell me that. What do you think? So B holds a gallon. It got that material from A. So A, therefore, has to have at least as much room as what? Can you tell me that? What is the answer to that question? It's easy. I mean, it's kind of like an old school math problem. B gets a gallon. It's been given that gallon from A. So you can just tell me. A would have to have minimum storage capacity of how much? How much? It's clear. But I need to see if you can tell me. Are you having difficulty with the chat? I just want to know if you can answer my quick question. The question is, how much capacity does A have to have if it's the container that gave that content to B? Anybody? Nobody? You make me wonder if there's like a technical difficulty or something with the way that you're not giving that quick response. So I'm just going to give you another moment here to see if that's going to happen. I still see our 18 viewers here. Like for a moment, there was like a internet connection notification that popped up on the screen, but that has happened in the past and it usually just goes right away. Nobody can send out a quick little chat to me to just verify. Let me see something if this works. Okay, wait. I can see your guys' comments now, but I have to look on my other device. So not to worry. I see your guys' comments. You're saying a gallon, and it's correct. Okay, it is 1 gallon. A has to have a gallon, obviously, right? Because if B received a gallon from A, then this has to be greater than or equal to that amount. If A was, let's say, a half-gallon container, then logically we understand it could not be the source from which B received its material. Okay? So sorry for that freeze for a second. Hopefully you're back online. I'm looking at your comments here in this thread, and hopefully, can somebody just quickly confirm that you're hearing what I'm saying right now? And then I'll see it on this, and then we'll be right back on track. Let's see. Just want to make sure we're all together here. Connection issues are bound to happen once in a while. Happy in a way that did not have to add another premise to the argument. And it's this premise, number 5. So since the idea of God has infinite reality, let me see what's up here with you guys. I might need to reestablish the chat unless people are able to get back into it. Very sorry for the technical difficulties. What can I say? But we'll fully reveal all the notes on this topic, whether it has to be something that I compress into future lectures or whether I have to add a supplementary 30-minute discussion on Friday or something to compensate. It'll all be fine. But I'm just going to check again on my other device to see the comments that are coming in. I had to quickly reset the phone because I think there was just some glitches. Thank you guys. I can see the comments. Okay, I see the most recent one at 10:27. Sorry for that, but let's just resume the steps of the argument where we were. We started with the premise that based on the method of doubt, I can doubt everything perceived by my senses, even math and logic. Thanks, Jessica, Caesar, Bridger. I see you guys commenting. It's very helpful. Okay, you can use the method of doubt to doubt all those things, but one thing that can't be doubted is that you exist, at least as a mind, because you are thinking. Included in your mind, there are ideas, including the idea of God, which he says is unique because it's the idea of an infinite being. Now, I just tried to walk you through a little demonstration of that concept, what it means that you have an idea of an infinite being. He says the cause of that idea has to have at least as much reality in it as the idea has. So since the idea of God is the idea of an infinite being, the cause of it likewise must have at least infinite reality, and so therefore, God exists. So since the cause of my idea of God must have infinite reality. God exists. So basically, this is the point in the argument where the author believes that he's shown that, that God has to exist. Why does he say God has to exist? Let's trace our steps back. Because you have an idea of God in your mind. How does that prove that God exists? Because of the claim that the idea here of God is an idea of something infinite, an infinite being. So the cause of an infinite idea can't be something that is less than infinite itself. That would be like a container with less than a gallon depositing a gallon in a second container, which is therefore impossible. So since the effect is the idea in your mind, which contains infinite reality, the cause of that effect must be traceable to a source that has got at least infinite reality. And if there's something that exists that has infinite reality and is the cause of your idea of God, then that's just God himself. So God must exist. Now, that's an important point within his argument overall, because it unlocks these further results that follow next. So based on the notion now that God exists, he says, well, one thing we know about God is known to be perfectly good. Omnibenevolent is the word. So since God exists and is known to be omnibenevolent, he is not a deceiver. That's the next claim. So since God exists and is perfectly good, he is therefore not a deceiver. Not a deceiver because he's perfectly good. And since he's not a deceiver, what that means is that clear and distinct perceptions must be true. So since God is not a deceiver, clear and distinct perceptions must be true. Let me explain that. Since God exists and is perfectly good, he's not a deceiver. So when I have clear and distinct perceptions, they must be true. Okay, so what he's saying there is that you've got an idea of God in your mind. Even if nothing else exists, nothing else is real, you know you're real because you're thinking. And when you're thinking, you can think about God. That's the idea of something infinite. Where's that idea coming from? It can't be coming from some random finite thing. It has to come from something which is itself infinite. Otherwise, it couldn't impart that idea to you. So we've got an idea of God, therefore he really does exist. Since he exists and he's known as perfectly good, he would never deceive you. So since God's not a deceiver, you can now hold fast to this guarantee that if you have a clear and distinct perception of something, it actually has to be true. Why is that being said? Because if you had clear and distinct perceptions, meaning you see and perceive things as clearly as they could be, and you would never normally doubt these things, if even those things could turn out to be false, like if right now you think you're watching a lecture, but oops, you're actually dreaming the whole thing and this is all just fake, then God would have made you so that you don't get reality correct. And that would be to manipulate and deceive you, but that's inconsistent with perfect goodness. So God guarantees, because he's perfectly good and not a deceiver, that when you have clear and distinct perceptions, they really have to be actually true. Okay? So that gives him leverage to open up the next premise, which says that one of my clear and distinct perceptions is that if two things can be understood as existing separately in the mind, then they can actually exist separately in reality. So I'm going to erase these premises, and we're going to add number 8 now at the top of the panel. So one of my clear and distinct perceptions is that if two things can be clearly conceived of as existing separately in the mind. Then they can, then they are actually two separate things in reality. So one of my clear and distinct perceptions, if two things can be clearly conceived of as existing separately in the mind, then those two same things are actually two separate things in reality. Okay, so let me explain this by means of a couple of straightforward examples right here. By the way, just checking in with you guys, making sure the chat is working. Anybody want to quickly hit me with a comment so I can make sure that there's good sort of interaction going on between us? I see the last comment, Jessica 1027, telling me that it's okay with the chat. Anybody else have anything to throw in there so I can just sort of verify that we're still all together? Great, thank you guys, Jordan and William. Okay, perfect. So, example of this premise. You see me here with this watch on my wrist. Right now the watch is on my wrist, so we're not separated. We're, connected. Can you, in your mind, imagine clearly me and the watch being separated from each other, existing separately from each other? Can you imagine that? Is that something that you can clearly imagine? I mean, I would hope that this is really no difficulty in answering. Can I repeat premise 7? Brian, you're asking me to repeat premise 7. I don't know, I erased it. What it said, I think, was since God exists and he's perfectly good, he would not allow me to be wrong about clear and distinct perceptions. So if I have clear and distinct perceptions, they're guaranteed to be true since God's not a deceiver. Maybe that's premise 7, but I don't remember it. You have to look in your own notes or you have to watch the video again. But back to what I was asking, me and the watch, okay? The watch is on my wrist, but you can clearly conceive of in your mind me and the watch being separated. So what does that mean? Since it's clearly conceivable that we can exist separately, like you can go through the mental process of imagining me taking the watch off and going away from it. Since you can clearly imagine or conceive of those two things being separate, then they really can exist separately in reality. Even though they're mingled together right now and it is on my wrist, the fact that you can clearly understand or imagine them existing apart from each other means they really can. Like, let me demonstrate, even though I don't need to. The wrist and the watch are being separated from each other. It exists over there, I'm over here, but we both still do exist. So when two things could be understood in the mind as being divided from each other, separated from each other, if that's clearly conceivable in thought, then those two things can actually exist separately in reality. Okay? And now let me read a passage from the Descartes, and you can hear him say that. He says here on page 556, left column, "First, I know that everything which I clearly and distinctly understand is capable of being created by God so as to correspond exactly with my understanding of it. Therefore, the fact that I can clearly and distinctly understand one thing apart from another is enough to make me certain that the two things are distinct, since they are capable of being separated, at least by God. The question of what kind of power is required to bring about such a separation does not affect the judgment that the two things are distinct. So therefore, simply by knowing that I exist and seeing at the same time," well, I'll get to that next passage in a moment. But for now, anyway, what we've shown is that when two things could be thought of as existing separately, basically they really could be. Now, me and the watch, that's easy. I could just take it right off. Other things are a little harder to separate from each other. Say that you had a glass of salt water. That used to just be salt and water in two different places, now mingled together, and the water is dissolved to salt. You might think, well, that's a little harder to separate the two things, not as simple as taking a wrist off of one object, or sorry, a watch off of one wrist. But, it's possible through some means. Like if you had a desalination procedure, you could boil up the salt water, allow the condensation to collect, and then separate the salt from the water. So even if that's a little more difficult, the fact that it's clearly conceivable means that it really could happen. And therefore that the two things don't necessarily have to exist with each other. They can exist separately from each other. So the ninth premise of the argument really gets us down to the end, basically. Because what he says next is that you can clearly conceive of the mind and the body existing separately. I can clearly conceive of the mind and the body existing separately. So this line means we've reached the end of the premises, and we're now going to state that conclusion. So what's the conclusion then? I mean, if you follow the logic here, what was said in the previous steps was, since God exists and he's known to be perfectly good, clear and distinct perceptions have to be true. One of those clear and distinct perceptions is that when you can imagine two things existing separately in your mind, then they really can exist separately in the factual reality. The ninth premise just says that you can clearly conceive of the mind and the body existing separately. Let me make some points about that. What the ninth premise means is that you can right now think of a possible situation where your mind is disembodied. For example, if you think of the method of doubt, it holds open the possibility that maybe you don't even have a body right now. Like maybe right now you are in a disembodied state, dreaming of the thought that you have this physical body. Since it's possible to doubt the existence of your body, but not the existence of your mind, you've already entertained the possibility that you have no body at all, and yet you're still thinking. So whether it is from the method of doubt or from common ideas associated with religion, we can and do, in fact, have the ability to conceive of our mind and body existing separately. When you think of the religious corollary to the method of doubt, providing the ability to think of the mind and the body being separated, you would think of death and the afterlife, how when the body's annihilated through the process of decomposition, that there's still some consciousness that would exist in the heavenly afterlife as a soul. So since it's clearly conceivable for you to think of your body being destroyed and your body no longer being attached to the mind, but your mind remaining and still having thought and consciousness in an immaterial, disembodied state, since it's possible for you to imagine your mind and your body existing apart from each other, that must mean that the two things are actually what? Now I'm looking for your comments over here on my phone. So just let me know what the answer is here. You can clearly conceive of the mind and body existing separately, and when two things could be understood existing separately by thought, then they could really exist separately in reality. So what's the ultimate conclusion of the argument then? Therefore, the mind and the body are what? See if you just state this conclusion for me. Therefore, the mind and the body are two separate things. Yes, they are really two different separate things. Therefore, I'll write it here kind of small, but then I'll type it in the chat bar so you can read it clearly. The mind and the body are two separate things. And that's just dualism. So that's the conclusion of the argument, and the conclusion is that dualism is true, because dualism just says that there's two different things in reality, both mind but also body. So this argument of Descartes for dualism is basically an argument based on the idea of conceivability. Now let me just type this in and see if it will appear. Conclusion. Okay, good. So we'll see if that appears in our chat, but I just typed it in. Looking over here at, yes, got it, okay. So I just typed the conclusion out so you can clearly read it. But this argument's based on conceivability, essentially. Now that we've got the full arguments laid out, let me go back over it one last time. So it starts off by just saying, here's a method of doubt that we've used to try and find out what is certain. But when we do use that method of doubt, which says assume to be false anything that could be doubted, then we can say we are doubtful of everything perceived by the five senses, even math and logic, for the dual reasons of dream possibilities and evil demon scenario. Nonetheless, one thing that remains certain is that you exist as a thinking thing, if nothing else, because you are thinking. So we ask the question, what's going on with these thoughts you're having? Well, you have ideas. Among the ideas is the idea of God, which has a unique position because it's the idea of something infinite. And so what he says is that since the idea of God is infinite, it has to be traceable to a source which has got at least that much reality. So that means there really has to be some infinite being that exists, which caused you to have the idea of God as an effect. So that means there's really a God. Why? Again, because you have an idea of him and it couldn't have come from anything else, since the idea is too great to come from anything finite. So there has to be a God. God is known as infinitely good, among other things. Since he's perfectly good, he would never deceive you when you do have clear and distinct perceptions. So here is a clear and distinct perception. The idea that if two things could be separated in thought and it's clear, then they could really exist separately in reality. So we can think of examples like me and my glasses, or me and the watch, or any two things that have a connection but could be disassociated with each other or separated from each other. The same, he claims, is true of your thinking about the mind and your own body. Here's your body, see it right there. But you're also a mind, he says, which is thinking. And he says that you can imagine your mind existing with the thoughts without the body attached at all. In fact, you can imagine that even right now your body's just a fiction, but you nonetheless are thinking. So since we can clearly conceive of the two things being separate, they must really be two separate things. And now I can finish reading your quote here from page 556. So he says, thus, simply by knowing that I exist, and seeing at the same time that absolutely nothing else belongs to my nature or essence except that I'm a thinking thing, I can infer correctly that my essence consists solely in the fact that I'm a thinking thing. It is true that I may have a body that is very closely connected to me, but nevertheless, on the one hand, I have a clear and distinct idea of myself insofar as I am simply a thinking, non-extended thing. And on the other hand, I have a distinct idea of body insofar as this is simply an extended, not thinking thing. And accordingly, it is certain that I am really distinct from my body and can exist without it. So the separation of me and the watch was easy to demonstrate just right here, because I could simply take it off. The separation of salt water from the water of salt water from the salt content is a little more complicated and requires more of a procedure. The separation of your mind from your body is something I guess that he's saying God could do, because it's a possibility and God can make all possible things actual. So although your mind and body are connected for now, just like me and these glasses are, they don't need each other to exist. That's the claim being put forward here. Your mind can, and I guess if you believe in the soul in the afterlife, will exist in a fully disembodied state, free of your body, at a future time, when the body ceases to exist and function, and the mind continues on and endures. So it's based on conceivability. It's based on the idea that people can think of and imagine their minds existing disassociated from, detached from, disembodied from their physical body. And God is the source of guarantee that that clear and distinct perception is actually true. Now, after he establishes this claim of dualism based on, the idea that God exists and he's perfect and he would never deceive you, and this is one clear and distinct thought that things are separable in reality when they can be separated in the mind, he adds a couple of additional clear and distinct judgments after that he thinks we can now also re-establish confidence in after the method of doubt. So what he ultimately says next is that another clear and distinct thing is that the external world really does exist, and it's not just a big dream or an illusion. And another clear and distinct perception is that you do have a body, and that it's not just a fake body that you seem to see like in a computer simulation. He gives reasons that those are clear and distinct perceptions that I will have to talk about for maybe 5 minutes at the beginning of next class. But this was really the core of today's meeting. I wanted you guys to understand an argument for dualism. So when people talk about, I don't know, like this is maybe not exactly 100% in line with his thinking, but in contemporary examples where people give like near-death experiences, sometimes people will say, I got hit by the car, I was in the emergency room, they were operating on me, and I started to float above my body, and I was looking down at the operating team as though I was like a ghost floating in the room, watching them do stuff on my physical body. Thinking about possibilities like this, thinking about the possible scenario of you continuing to have consciousness with no body attached to the consciousness, that possible thought process is what he says is able to really happen because it is so clearly and distinctly conceivable. And if it wouldn't be possible to really happen, then God would not have made it clearly and distinctly conceivable. So God is all good, and he lets us know that clear and distinct perceptions will not turn out to be false because he's not out to trick us or deceive us. So is it clear and distinct that these two things could be separated in thought? Descartes says yes. And in general, when two things can be understood existing separately, whether they are mingled together now or not, they don't have to be, and they ultimately could be pulled apart from each other, existing in two different ways, in two different locations. So the mind and the body are like me and the watch, or my body and these glasses. They're connected for now, but at a future time, they'll both exist separately. The body in the grave, the soul wherever, in heaven, or at least liberated from the mortal coil of the body. So that's his argument for dualism. It's an argument that says it's not just all mind, it's not just all matter, but it's both. You're not just a universe full of objects that are made out of matter, but when it comes to consciousness and thought, there's something that is immaterial about it. There's something that is not built out of atoms or physical substance at all, but is pure consciousness and pure thought, unalloyed with, unmixed with the body. So we have a body, but it's not essential to being the mind that you are. You're most essentially the thinking thing that inhabits the body or is mixed together with it. But should the body be destroyed, the consciousness would endure, at least according to this position of dualism. So I want to help you with a little bit more of it. Sorry for the little technical glitches that happened some way in the middle, but I'm glad that we were all able to sort of recover from that and get back on track. It's something that I don't think is likely to happen again, but if so, just know that we can always get through it. Just go back to the same YouTube channel, click on the live cast. If you happen to get booted for a second, or if the chat wasn't working, just go back into the chat and I'll continue working with you as I'm monitoring it on other devices live. Okay, well everybody, great meeting, good to see you guys again, and have a good day. I'll see you back on Friday. Read the Daniel Stoljar, read the JJC Smart, and we'll see if we can cover those two authors on Friday to add to our discussion of the philosophy of mind. All right, guys. Well, thanks so much again, and I'll see you on Friday. Bye-bye.